Good afternoon, and welcome to St. Andrew's United Church. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making your way through the rain and the wind and all of the chaos of the last few days for the sake of John. When John and his beloved Carol were about to be married in Ottawa, there was a blizzard bearing down on the city, and there were all these questions and unknowns. Would there be a wedding? Would there be power? Would there be people who could actually come to the wedding? But John and Carol, I'm told, were absolutely determined, especially Carol, that this wedding would take place on December 21st in Ottawa, blizzard or no. And it did. So much like today, the unknowns and the questions, and here you have all gathered on this day, and those of you who are gathering online with us today, we welcome you, and we welcome you here, because there are powers that are beyond our small efforts at control. Powers like the weather, and like love, and like life and death, and even life beyond death. And there is also this. Not that. So, that would be within your power. But there is this, a far more powerful symbol, which is light. And when we light it here, on this day, it's a symbol of a light that does not go out, even when we cannot see it. It is a light within, it is a light among, and it is a light beyond. And this day and this week, this light is also for all of those who are in the darknesses of their homes right now, and the chill of the devastation of the hurricane. It is a light that does not go out, within, among, and beyond. And it's a light that is with Carol today, John's beloved, in the dim shadows and the absence of John, a light that is within and among and beyond. And even in death, and with those who mourn, if they cannot see it for a time, there is a trust in this light that is within and among and beyond, regardless of our small efforts at control. It is a light that does not go out. And it is sacred. Whatever your understanding of the sacred is welcome here today and belongs here. If that comes from an experience of a faith tradition, Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Hinduism, it's welcome here. But if that understanding of the sacred comes from your experience of life and the heart, or from nature, or from philosophy or science, it all belongs here and is welcome here, because it is precisely that allows us to celebrate and give thanks for John, to commend him to rest and safekeeping, and especially to bring all that we are and all that we feel into a sacred space. So with that in mind, I invite you to prayer. Let us pray. Holy God, Spirit of life and love, within us and among us, we give thanks for each one gathered here for the sake of John. As we enter into sacred time, may they be a present help in times of sorrow and light to share within, among, and beyond. Amen. We will have 4 speakers here today who come from different aspects of John and Carol's life: family and friend, politics, philanthropy, law, people who knew them well and continue to hold them in their hearts and their memories and their stories. And of course, you never do encapsulate an entire life in an hour like this, and that's not the intent. It is simply to evoke John's presence, to help us to know that he is, in fact, here with us, as is Carol. And we begin with family.
First of all, thank you all for coming on this crazy hurricane weekend we had. But we're here to celebrate the life of John, my brother. And I'm reminded of a discussion with John where I said that if I agree with you, then we both would be wrong. John would argue his point and have the last word. This time, I have the last word. John was always there to support the brothers. I was starting school when John was going into junior high. I would hang around the ballpark in the field, and John would let me play ball his way. He said he would hit the ball, and I had to go find it and bring it back. He said, we can repeat that again. That was John. I look at it this way. It's an early game of fetch, but it was his way of delegating, I guess. John became interested in politics in junior high. Mom and Dad were off and off to meetings from time to time in yacht clubs, service clubs, and political gatherings. I must say there might have been more liberal political meetings than others. He started that at an early age. If someone needed help, we all would chip in. His grounding and helping to make the community a better place started at a young age and started at home. When it came to schooling, Mother was the boss, and she kept the boys in line. John led the way as he ran for president of Students' Council in high school, was involved in Dartmouth High Y, and president of the Housing Student Union, among others, while completing his law degree. He made his family proud of the little Johnny. He was a Dartmouth boy whose roots went back 4 generations. Little Johnny wanted to see the community grow and prosper, and he did. Once he had established himself in the practice of law in Dartmouth, I showed him a postcard from 1898 listing all the attributes at Dartmouth and why people were moving there. It listed all kinds of things like good schools, healthcare, businesses, recreation, and the lakes. But at the bottom it had no lawyers. He said 100 years later with Boyne Clark, they've taken care of that. John had a quiet faith, and when he and Carol started coming to St. Andrews, the minister then asked him what his religious background was. We'd all grown up in Baptist Church in Dartmouth, and John was now over here with Carol. In reply to the minister's question, John answered, "You can call me John the Baptist." John settled in and has worked on committee work at this church ever since, and he was proud of what he was doing. Thinking about the great work that John did, I cannot leave out Carol, his spouse, partner for life. Carol and John were well matched. As they met when both were political executive assistants in Ottawa, almost 50 years ago. They hosted and participated in many family gatherings, and with the adoption of Michael, they were a wonderful family, with Michael receiving their full love and attention. Michael was gifted in music and inspired and touched so many, and for family and our boys who played with Michael. It was a time to remember. And in later years, Carol and John would travel the world on vacation and meet many people where they would keep in touch with. John saw the world and realized what a great country, province, and municipality we live in. He learned from what he saw and tried to put some ideas in place so that Canada would be forever a better place going forward. John was proud of the growth in the community, the province, and the country. He was a proud Nova Scotian and Canadian, and above all, he was appreciative of everything he could do to help everybody get better. John would want us all to do what you want to do now. Don't wait. Get up every day and put one foot ahead of the other and keep going. There were many committees and organizations that John became more involved in after he retired, or as I told him, he was reclassified for other duties. John was my best friend, my older brother, sports attendee, but only when Dell was playing. Actually, Carol would come to more basketball games. I think she knew what she was talking about. But he and Carol were married in Ottawa, as is mentioned, in a wicked snowstorm. But somehow they managed to get out of town, and everybody else was stuck at the airport. So again, we find ourselves with a storm that's second to none. And John is leaving again. All I can say is, he's hard to replace, and I miss him dearly, but may he rest in peace. Thank you.
It's holy water. But I know if Dr. Savage was here, God rest his soul, it wouldn't be holy water. Anyway, somebody said, Bob asked me how did I get to know John. And by the way, the last time I was in this church, I sang in this church for a wedding for Justin and Heather McDonough 22 years ago, I think. And but how did I meet John? Well, I came to live in Halifax in 1980. And I bought a house up near the Forum, and I called my good friend Brooks Diamond. I said, Brooks, I need a lawyer. And she said, you got to call my friend John Young. He's a really smart guy. But John at that time was on the board of CBC, and as we all know, John was an incredible cultured man. So I called up John. I said, John, my name is Dennis Ryan. I'm a friend of Brooks Diamond. And of course, he almost hung up when he heard that. But he said, oh, I know who you are. I see your shows on TV and blah, 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 blah. But he says, I'm very busy right now doing corporate stuff. But I'll put you on to my real estate guru, Tom Boyne. You never knew that story, did you? Anyway, so, but as we all know, I'm going to sing now in a minute, by the way. John, for the last 42 years in this region, I'd MC fundraisers or charities and the odd political gig or whatever. And of course, John would always turn up at these things, and people would I'd be up on the stage trying to get everybody to sit down and say, let the show start. Well, of course, John would meander, himself and Carol would meander up to the front of the stage. And of course, it became a bit of a habit then. I said, ladies and gentlemen, let the show begin. John Young is here. Sit down. Well, everybody else would sit down, but John's just, and he'd give the big wave to the crowd, right? He was a bit like you, Mike, that way, right? Anyway, this is a sort of a traditional song, an Irish traditional song, and it was always sung at the end of parties or even wakes. And I'm going to sing this, and if I can't sing the whole lot of it, it's only 3 short verses, because I've had a bit of a throat problem. I'll recite it. But this last verse, I think if you could think of Carol Young, and so there's 3 verses to it. Of all the money that e'er I had, I spent it in good company, and all the harm that e'er I done, alas, it was to none but me. And all I've done for the want of wit, to memory now I can't recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Of all the comrades e'er I had, they're sorry for my going away. And all the friends that e'er I had, they'd wish me one more night to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should rise and you should not, then I gently rise and softly call, good night and joy be with you all. If I had money enough to spend, and leisure time to sit a while, there is a fair maid in this town that sorely hath my heart beguiled. Her rosy cheeks and ruby lips, I own she has my heart enthralled. Then fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be with you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to say a few words about John today. I first want to extend the most sincere sympathies of myself, my wife Darlene, my family, including my sister Bridget, who are here today, to all of his family and to his closest friends. I saw John the day before he died. John Fitzpatrick picked me up at City Hall, and we went to the hospital. I don't honestly know that we were supposed to be there, but Fitz said, "Follow me." I've made that mistake before. But we just went up and parked illegally, went in probably unethically, and we went into John's hospital room. And John, although obviously weak, said, "Thanks for coming, boys." And he wanted to talk. And you know what? We talked about two things. One of them, unsurprisingly, was politics. He started the conversation. He contributed to the conversation. He had a few questions and a few opinions. And I'm so glad that we went to see him that day. I don't know the first time I met him, but I got to know him during Jim Cowan's leadership in 1985 and 86. I was coming off my father's first campaign for mayor. I was planning to get a regular job. But John came to see me and he asked me to take 6 months and work with Jim Cowan, who John assured me was a bright young star destined to be the Premier of Nova Scotia. I still hold out that hope, by the way. He came to see me at my parents' house on the lake. He was already a big shot, legendary to a young person interested in politics like myself. He had Michael with him, who would probably have been around 8 years old. Michael lay on the wharf while we talked. Michael loved the water. He had his hands in the lake, just going back and forth in the water. He didn't realize it, but when he turned around, it was clear he had ripped a bandage away from his body. John noticed and carefully went over, gently wiped the blood away, replaced the bandage, and took Michael on his lap. It was a side of the legendary John Young that I hadn't expected at that point in time, but which I came to know. The amazing story of love between Carol and John and Michael was so inspiring. I won't ever forget John saying, I believe at Michael's funeral in Dartmouth, that Michael was like any other child his age, except that he was never truly healthy a single day of his life. On that day by the lake, John told me how important this opportunity was. Sure, I could get another job, I could make a few bucks, but this was a chance to get involved in politics and learn from the ground up. He spoke about how he got involved with people like Alan Jay, Jerry Regan, and he spoke about why politics mattered. That was more than 35 years ago, and I can still remember his passion for politics. I know how much he loved law, and I know how much he loved business, but he lived politics. He believed in it. He had faith in it. And for all of its imperfections, it was the way to make life better. He felt it. He understood it, and boy, did he like to talk about it. And of course, it's where he got to know Carol. Carol Young is the smartest political mind I've ever known. John was close, but Carol was the best. And what a team they made. Anybody who wanted to take on a political task in our province, particularly those inclined to be liberal, but not exclusively, would want to see John and Carol and get advice, a sort of laying on of hands. And they were happy to oblige. What a pleasure it was to spend time with them. Who would ever turn down a dinner with the Youngs? Show of hands. Most of you have been at that table. The wonderful meal, the fine wine, the great company, and the conversation. Now, John always had some information to share, a little inside information, perhaps a new unpublished opinion poll to support his position. I would never suggest they were manufactured or exaggerated or anything like that. I just think perhaps they were occasionally more in anticipation of evidence than as a direct result. In any event, it was such a treat, and it would inspire conversation, until eventually Carol would step in and say, John, be quiet, sometimes more directly than that even. John, be quiet, that's ridiculous. And he would shrug, and the chat would go in another direction. The evening progressed, sometimes even after John had nodded off at the table. So John was the ultimate strategist, but he put himself in the game as well. He became president of the Liberal Party in 1992. One of his first acts was the organizing of the 1992 Liberal Party leadership campaign, the first convention in Canada to use the brand new technology of telephone voting. John was the mastermind of it, and he insisted that nothing could go wrong. So when the whole thing collapsed, on the day of the vote, John was nonplussed. He opened the bar for everybody at the expense of the phone company and rescheduled the vote for a few weeks later. One of his biggest challenges after that was that he inherited a new Liberal leader who wanted no part of the historic Liberal trust funds, which had been collected over the years. My father insisted he wanted the party to disavow all proceeds of those funds. Many others saw it differently, and I recall at one point John looking at my father and saying, for God's sake, John, you're running to be premier, not pope. Let us get you elected. So that was the practical side of John. A compromise was reached, an election was won, and the world carried on the way John Young wanted it to be. Some years after that, when I was party president and we were in dire needs of funds, imagine, I asked John for advice. We had planned this little brunch to raise a few dollars at $100 a person. John said, to hell with that. You need 800 people to pay $300 and wipe out your debt. I said, yeah, good, John, will you do it? He said, I will do it, and he did. And I know we helped lots of other people the same way. So that was the ambitious side of John, because he always pitched in when he was asked. When significant political personalities would come to town, prime ministers among them, They would often make their way to the young household, and they would receive advice and political feedback. Carol was always respectful, but also direct. You might know that. If he didn't want my advice, he wouldn't have asked for it, she said about one prime minister who visited their place. John had a mischievous side as well, which he used to make a point when necessary. I can recall a time when a candidate I won't name for an office I won't identify pulled some of us together for debate prep. John was good at that, and he loved it. He could pontificate. It was a campaign that was not going very well. To start off and to inject a note of optimism, John said that the key to a successful debate was to exceed expectations. And he leaned across the table and said to the candidate, "You have done a marvelous job of keeping expectations low so far." His heart was enormous, even though occasionally disguised by what sometimes appeared to be a benevolent, I've heard pompous arrogance. But he was a mentor to so many people in law, business, politics, and philanthropy. He and Carol spent time, real time, encouraging young people and providing support. He fed off the enthusiasm of young minds, eagerly engaging, providing feedback, offering opportunity. He didn't mind being challenged, and he would respond in kind, with evidence, either real or imagined, but at least plausible. And many of us then knew the look. I call it the John Young look. When he triumphantly had pulled out some information, pronounced it proudly, and then he would turn to you like this, as if to say, "Top that." And you would recoil when you got the look, especially when he told you he had learned it yesterday in conversation with Barack Obama or Tony Blair or the German Chancellor of the time. How do you argue with that? And of course, there was the John Young laugh. That won't be forgotten. The last number of months have been hard on John and on Carol. It's always a pleasure, though, for Darlene and I to see them out together, sometimes at dinners or in June at the naming of the Brigadoon campfire pit in honor of Michael. And whenever they were there, John had an incredible tenderness and was doing everything he could to make sure that he and Carol were both comfortable. And whenever I spoke to John in recent weeks, he said the same thing that Bob mentioned. If there are things you want to do, Michael, do it today. Do it today. I know he said that to many of you in the last little while. Now, he may feel robbed of the opportunity to do things he wished, but he needn't. He was widely acknowledged in this province and in this country, had a hugely successful career, gave back to his community in so many ways, had the opportunity to travel the world with his beloved wife, and the opportunity to experience the world largely on his own terms. His brilliant shadow will remain, and when people think of John Young, they will smile. I mentioned my visit with Fitz to see John the day he passed away. I said we talked about two things. One was politics. The other was Carol and Michael. He was so pleased to be able to leave his hospital a few days earlier, and I know there were people here who helped to make that happen. That meant the world to him. He kept saying on that day with John and I how happy he was that Carol was in a good place. Set up nicely, he said a few times. In a good room with a good view with people who were so good to her. It was clearly his biggest concern, and it eased his mind considerably to know that she was okay as he approached the end of his own life. It seems that John, who often told me I'm just a Dartmouth lawyer, was always destined for special things. Big expectations followed him. Academically gifted, a student leader, an enormously successful lawyer, a philanthropist, a community builder, a political icon, a champion of our military and their families. His achievements, honors, and recognitions are many, but I expect John Young would most wish to be remembered as a man from a wonderful family with many good friends who married an amazing woman whose abilities and contributions brought him such pride and joy, and as the father of a remarkable child who passed away more than 3 decades ago before even reaching his teenage years, but never left John in mind or heart. Those of us privileged to have known John are grateful for his time in this world and will remember his huge contributions and his huge laugh. If the key to a great life is to exceed expectations, even lofty ones, then John Young did that and more. And those of us whose lives he touched and brightened will miss him greatly.
Good afternoon, everybody. To quote George Carlin, because it's a funny line, and I know John would want me to start with a funny line today. I'm always relieved when someone is delivering a eulogy and I realize that I'm actually listening to it. It just reminded me of John. I feel deeply honored to be here today to talk about John Young. He was a friend, a colleague, and a champion in our community. And I'm so sorry to his family and his friends for his passing. It's a big loss. Most of us live our lives focusing on our careers, our families, and our friends. We help when asked and do what we can to contribute to the world around us. Some of us go beyond what is asked of us and contribute to our community and country in a much broader way. John Young was that person. He was extraordinary in his actions and his deeds and in the love he showed to many of us throughout his lifetime. I know we all miss him, and we're all sad today. To live in the hearts of people we left behind is not really to die at all. As I look outwards today, I see some of what I affectionately call the guardians of our community. These are extraordinary people like John, who go above and beyond to help build and preserve our community so we can all live better lives. John and his fellow guardians have helped and continue to help so many people they themselves will never meet or know. But these guardians, like John, do this work for the greater collective good. John believed in Canada, and he believed in our community right here at home, and he very much believed in Dartmouth. He believed in the underdog, connecting at the right time and sparking ideas, never looking for or taking the credit, working on opportunities and programs that have left a long legacy for generations to come. John and Carol have impacted our community in so many ways. It's impossible to talk about John and not include Carol. They were a team, a couple, that no matter who brought the cause or idea, politics, community, philanthropy to the table, the other one supported it. Let me cite just a few examples, and there are only a few, of the kinds of work John and Carol were involved in over the years. John was an active board member and former chair of the QE2 Foundation, and he was instrumental in helping the board decide to take on this new thing at the time called the lottery. It was risky, but he pushed forward and encouraged others in the organization to make it happen. Today, millions of dollars have been raised for our healthcare system, and thousands of people have been positively impacted from that one spark of an idea and that encouragement from people like John. Likewise, Family SOS needed a new event that they could raise funds for their cause. And like many programs over the years that the Youngs participated in, the idea for the Courage to Give Back Awards was created at their dinner table. John was Brigadoon's corporate lawyer up until he retired and started with the organization from its earliest days. John and Carol were one of the first donors to the organization and gave from the heart and in memory of their son, Michael, as you just recently heard from Mike. John chaired the Let's Go campaign, which secured seed funding to start the summer camps in the very, very early days. Over the years, like most organizations John supported, He continued to be there for leaders like me and others, always giving advice, always help, always support, and yes, sometimes the inside information we all needed to hear. John and Carol became aware of Brigadoon through their connection to the IWK. Liz Crocker and her late husband Brian, a former law partner, went over to dinner to the Youngs. Liz was spearheading the Child Life program at the IWK. At the time, this was an innovative and new program. Fast forward to today, it is standard practice to have a Child Life program in every pediatric hospital on the continent. Liz talked about needing volunteers, and Carol said she would help. To be fair, I think at the time Carol envisioned a child around 10 or so that she could read and talk to, and not a very small little newborn, a waif, as Carol and John later called this precious little boy. Michael was born premature, he was blind, and he had a serious health challenge, a very rare kidney disease. Doctors noticed that as soon as Carol and ultimately John touched Michael, talked to him, cuddled him, held him, and spent time with him, his heart rate would settle down, and he became stronger. Over time, Carol and John fell in love with Michael. Through weekends at their home, and on the day they adopted Michael, John is quoted as saying it was simply the happiest day of their lives when they made Michael their own. Michael had a huge impact on the lives he encountered. While blind, he had an amazing ear for music and was wise beyond his years. In my role at the IWK Foundation and at the IWK itself, I have often had the opportunity to talk to caregivers. And when I ask them how they manage to come in day after day to care for very seriously ill children like Michael, some of whom you know are not going to make it, they're going to pass, they say, these little kids, these little souls are the teachers, and we are the students. When people used to say how lucky Michael was to have Carol and John as his parents, this touches me so deeply. They would say, no, not us. We're the lucky ones to have had Michael. John loved to play ball with Michael, like any father and son activity that most of us take for granted. He'd put a bell inside the ball so Michael could hear it, and he counted down from 3, 2, 1. So when it got to 1, Michael knew the ball was close for him to kick back to his dad. At Christmas time, Carol and John didn't overload Michael with all his presents in one day, but spread them out over time. They rigged up elaborate rope systems so Michael could get around the house and the garden. In essence, what they did is they made his life as normal as possible. As the late Queen Elizabeth said, grief is the price you pay for love. Michael passed at a tender age of 12, but lived way longer than any doctor ever expected him to live, because he was nurtured on the best possible medicine, love, from Carol and John. Through the years of looking after Michael and going to the IWK, John and Carol got to know the IWK teams and the organization and realized that they wanted to do more to support the place that gave them their son. They were close to IWK giants like Dr. Goldblum, Dr. Bagnall, and many more, and knew about the needs and wants of this organization. Carol had seen this idea of children's hospitals in the US broadcasting telethons on TV to raise money. And with John's help, who was on the board of the CBC at the time, and many other supporters in the community, the IWK telethon was born. And the very first telethon was also Michael's second kidney transplant, and she said it was the second miracle, the first being Michael's operation. Fast forward 39 years and look at the support the IWK receives every single year. Millions of dollars have been raised through thousands of volunteers, and in one of the most generous places we all live in, here. This event is like an annual big hug from the community and has both impacted and saved thousands of lives throughout those years. To have the privilege of knowing John was to know he was far more interested in you and what you were doing than talking about himself. I loved his self-deprecating sense of humor, funny but also displaying his sharp intellect and wit in his comments. John was always readily available when you chatted to him. I can remember one of his favorite lines he liked to attribute to Carol, but he was always the one saying it. Behind every great man is a very surprised woman. He would get such a kick out of saying that one line and watching a reaction, mostly from women. Because at the front part of that, you're waiting to jump on him, but then it's so typical him. John loved his honorary role with the military. When I was appointed myself an honorary colonel and he found out, he immediately chatted to me and said, "Have you had the opportunity to shoot the rifles yet?" I said, perplexed, "No, and I honestly don't think it would be a good idea to give me a rifle under any circumstances. Given my lack of dexterity and appalling sense of direction, someone's going to get hurt." John, on the other hand, had been out to the rifle range and got the biggest kick out of that experience. He was so honored to be with the military, and I'm looking at all the uniforms in front of me right now. He really was. He was also, me being Irish, he was also not able to come near me without wanting to have a political conversation, and he knew I was always good for it because I simply can never not have a political conversation, and he always got a rise out of me. John was a warm, loving man who kept his private life private and his public life humble. If he could do you a good turn, he would. If he could help you or your organization you represented, he was there, and he never looked for the credit or recognition. It's literally hundreds of organizations that man has touched. John, you truly were one of our guardians. You helped build a community, launched so many organizations and programs that will continue to have an impact and leave a legacy for generations to come. We owe you so much, and I hope you know how grateful we all were for the impact you created and the good you did for so many in this community. If you reflect on life, it's a continuum. Just as we reach back to our ancestors for our fundamental values, so as guardians of that legacy, most reach ahead to our children and their children, and we do so with a sense of sacredness in the reaching. I like to think John is with Michael and his family and friends that have gone before him, and he's at peace and content with the life he lived and the legacy he built here with us. Let us find solace today together in our collective loss of John, and to quote David Whyte, the Irish Welsh poet, "Solace is the beautiful, imaginative home we make where disappointment can go to be rehabilitated. When life does not in any way add up, we must turn to the part of us that has never wanted a life of simple calculation. Solace is found in allowing the body's innate wisdom to come to the fore, the part of us that already knows it is mortal and we must take its leave. We will never know it is our last day until it is. So in honor of John and in taking solace at his passing, let us all continue to strive to be those guardians of our precious community, to do what we want to do in life and be who we want to be, knowing it will always need our love, this community of ours and this country of ours, and support. And so we all thrive in that collective legacy that is and can be our birthright. Godspeed, John.
50 years ago this year, 3 law students recently graduated and articled, had a stupid idea to start a law firm. And so we did. A year later, a fellow graduate who had completed a master's degree at LSE joined us. And the year after that, John Young joined us. In John's case, he actually came to us and asked to join our firm. I was stunned. I couldn't understand why John Young, the little I knew of him at that time, would ever want to hang with a bunch of young lawyers who really knew nothing at the time. But he chose us. Actually, at the time, he would have been our second hire, both who had master's degrees from LSE, and we adopted a policy that said henceforth we would only hire people who had master's degrees from some reasonable university. John's impact was noted immediately. He led us to look beyond our day-to-day things. He led us to think that we could actually do something, that we could amount to something. And that impact started the day he joined us, and it had lasted, in fact, it lasts to today. I gave a thought as to, over the last couple of months when John was ill, and since his death, as to what sort of relationship we actually had. You all know John Young. Some of you who would know me would know that John Young and Tom Boyne are not very similar at all. We had completely different interests. He was smart. I was happy to get into law school. He had contacts. I knew no one. He walked with kings. I wasn't even high enough to be the common man. But for 48 years, we existed side by side. We had offices adjacent to one another, and I think John and I spent more time together than either he or I ever spent with any other living person. I hate that I would even think that, let alone say that out loud. Nevertheless, as I tried to define my relationship with John, I struggled to try to put a label on it of some sort or other. And I determined that we were like brothers. Sorry, Bob. We were like brothers. John was the older brother, and I was the younger brother. I looked up to John. I respected him. I was so proud of his accomplishments, which he kept telling me about. But as a younger brother, I thought, aha, younger brothers, no matter how highly they hold, with high regard they hold their older brothers in, always reserve the right to dump on them. So part of my career was to try to keep John close to the ground, to poke fun at him, to laugh at him, to find everything I could think of to sort of put him down a little bit. I don't think John ever really noticed the efforts that I put into that. But as a younger brother, I wanted to talk a little bit about the human side of John Young that I experienced. I hate to say this, but John Young could be pompous. I don't know if anyone else noticed that. And he could be condescending. His pomposity could be good or it could be bad. As recently as a couple of weeks before he died, I spent some time with him, and he reminded me once again that he had dined with Queen Elizabeth II. Now this he told me before we were aware of her issues and that she was near the end. Although knowing John, he probably had been talking to the Archbishop of Canterbury or something, and they were aware of that. But anyway, he said, yes, I remind you that I did dine with Queen Elizabeth II. And being John Young, of course, he added, on the Royal Yacht Britannia. Which was true. But I said to John, of course you did. John, you and 200 or 300 other people in Halifax dined with the Queen. he was quite offended. He said, "That's not true at all. I had breakfast with the Queen, and there were 12 other people present." And he proceeded to name them. It was like the Premier of Nova Scotia, Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, President of the United States, and I think there was a Pope or two included in that, but I don't remember any of the names. His pomposity, though, also could be great fun. Our law firm belonged to an international association of law firms. There were like 150 or 200 law firms in total, and every year there'd be the convention. John attended the convention once on behalf of the firm, and while in attendance, I guess during some of the social functions or at a dinner, John was listing off the people he knew or he had met and had carried on with. And an American lawyer who was there took great offense and said, "I suppose you talk regularly to the Premier of China." To which John said, no, I have not, but I have spoken with the Deputy Premier, which was a true story because John had acted on behalf of a company called Min Metals, who was a Chinese steel company which was negotiating the purchase of Sydney Steel, and John had bumped into him. John could also be condescending. He spent a good deal of time being condescending towards me. When he was the president of the Liberal Party in the 90s that Mike referred to, and a couple of times John came into my office and said to me, "Look, let me run something by you. This is a policy matter that we're thinking of implementing. I want to get your views on it." I would hold forth and rant on about with stupid ideas. John would never acknowledge the brilliance of what I was saying. He would just simply leave. But a few years later, we were talking about something, and John, I don't think he recognized it, even said, I like your opinions because I like to be connected with, the man on the street, the great unwashed, and you give me those views. John was one of the worst car drivers ever licensed in the province of Nova Scotia. Anyone who ever drove with him would recognize that they really are survivors, not passengers. When John and Carol moved to Doyle Street, John used to take the bus, which was a strange thing for someone of his status to do. But he would also walk down and take the ferry to Dartmouth and walk up to the office. But he would never go home in the same route. He would walk about the office and solicit rides from the young lawyers in our office. And they would drive him home, often stopping for refreshments on the way. And I used to say to John, "You can't do this. These are young professionals. You can't expect them to be your chauffeurs." He would dismiss me like that as usual and stuff. But interestingly, since John's passing, a number of those young lawyers, who are now older lawyers, sent me notes saying how they appreciated that opportunity to drive home with John and how he used that opportunity to inquire about their careers. And they saw them as being mentoring events. The fools. But it's hard to talk about John without talking about Carol, as all of my predecessors have done. A spectacular woman. However, you probably don't know that Carol and I had a mutual job function. That was to try to keep John's feet somewhat close to the ground. I attended to it during work hours. She covered for me the rest of the time at night and on the weekends. Carol, again, as Mike said, wasn't hesitant to say to Carol, to say to John, "You don't know what you're talking about. Shut up. Be quiet." My favorite story of all, though, was that when John was meeting with the Deputy Premier of China, before he went, his business cards were sent to the embassy in Ottawa. And on the back side of the business cards, Chinese characters were added. I presume to say something about John Young. But anyway, John flashed these everywhere. I think he had thousands of them because every chance he had, he flashed one out. And we were having dinner with Carol and John one night, and out comes the card, and John shows it to my wife, and Debbie says, "Oh, John, what does that say on the back?" And Carol said to Debbie as quick as a wink, "I think it says, F you, John Young." Sorry. I tell you these things because it was fun being with John Young. I have Kleenex here somewhere, but I don't need it just yet. We were a big part of each other's lives. He was a huge influence on my career and on my life, and I shared many wonderful moments with him. And, you know, I did love him like a brother. Thank you.
We will end this ritual with a prayer of commendation for John. And then when we do, you are all invited to join us for a reception in the hall and a time for conversation and connecting with friends, old and potentially new. You can go through these doors or those doors, or you could even go out the back if it's easier, and around the side and back into the hall at the back of the sanctuary. Many ways to get there, but we hope that you all will come. I invite you, the beloved friends and colleagues and peers of John, to please stand. John, your friends and family and colleagues, those whose lives were touched by you, your life and your light, commend you now to rest, to safekeeping, to return to the love from which you came. John, may you rest in peace and rise in light. Amen. Please remain standing while the family goes first.